Hi, I'm Jon Peterson. I'm a professor of mathematics at Purdue University. Now, when most people find out that I'm a mathematician, I guess mainly what they think about is a math teacher. But a big part of my work at Purdue is doing math research. And many people, when they first think about, hear the word math research, they wonder, well, what is math research? And the way I think about math research, or the way I usually explain it to people, is math research is just like a really hard homework problem. It's a problem in math that hasn't been solved yet, and it's my job to sort of find out what the answer is. And in that sense, it's research, because it's discovering something that wasn't known before. But a friend of mine in graduate school had an interesting way of explaining it as well. He talked about when people would ask him, why do you like doing mathematics? They thought math was so boring. He would say, well, I like mathematics because I like archaeology. And he explained it as the math, the things that we're discovering, they're already there. They're hidden there. It's just nobody knew it yet. And when we're doing new mathematics, we're actually not creating anything new, we're just discovering it. And now this friend of mine, he wasn't a Christian, but I think he hit on something really deep when he was explaining it this way. Because all this math, all these things that we're discovering, they were hidden there, and as a Christian, they were hidden there by God. So as a Christian, when I see mathematics being done, I really see us uncovering the mind of God in some ways. Mathematicians like to talk a lot about a beautiful proof. Okay, and to non-mathematicians, maybe that sounds weird. They don't think of math as beautiful, but mathematicians really do think of math as beautiful. And a beautiful proof to us is a clear argument, an argument that's really easy to understand, that really cuts right to the issue. And when I see a beautiful proof, I see the beauty of God in that. Because God had made this truth, and he had hidden it in our world, and just was waiting for someone to sort of stumble along this thing that he had known for ages. Now, my own research is in probability theory. I study different models of random walks or random motion. As a Christian, though, this creates an interesting dilemma. Because on the one hand, in my work, I'm studying random processes. I'm studying randomness. Yet on the other hand, as a Christian, I believe in God's sovereignty, that God has ordained whatsoever comes to pass, and that there is no randomness in some sense. In fact, one of my favorite theologians, R.C. Sproul, says that chance is nothing. Chance is literally no thing, right? That God knows what's going to happen, and in a sense, it doesn't make sense to ask questions about what's the probability that this thing happens. In fact, we all sort of know this. The prototypical example of randomness is a coin flip. When I teach probability classes, we talk all the time about coin flips. We flip a coin, and we ask, what's the probability that it comes up heads? Okay? But really, that's not math. That's just physics. But that doesn't mean that my work that I do is irrelevant, because there are so many millions of factors that come into play when we're thinking about a coin flip, or even much, much more intricate systems of biology or physics, of interacting systems, that in our ignorance, because we can't understand everything like God can, we have to sort of approximate reality with probabilistic models, which things that to us look random. But in reality, I understand that in the mind of God, this is all already known. Thinking about this issue of randomness, and are things really random, and does God know everything that's going to happen, it also leads to some really deep and interesting questions in theology. And I think my training as a mathematician also helps me understand some of these deep theological questions. In particular, the question of God's sovereignty and man's free will. How can it be that God is sovereign, yet also we have free will? And I think part of my understanding of how I think about this comes from mathematics. There's a wonderful book by Edwin Abbott called Flatland. And it was a book that he wrote in part to help people understand how to think about higher dimensions. It's an interesting thought experiment to think about how you would explain something about the three-dimensional world to someone who only knew two dimensions. And that's what the book Flatland is about. The main character in the book is a character named A Square, and he lives in a two-dimensional world. And he's very happy in his two-dimensional world until one day he's visited by someone from the third dimension. He gets this voice from the third dimension is telling him that there's more than just his two-dimensional world. Okay? And when he comes to like a house or an object, he has to walk all around all sides of it to see that it's a square or a triangle, to figure out what shape it was. But this visitor from the third dimension says, well, I can look in the third dimension from above, and I can see all at once what this shape looks like. I don't have to walk around it. Okay? And when I think about God, I think that it's somewhat similar. That God is outside of our space and time dimensions. The Bible says that God knows the end and knows the beginning. He's not in time like the rest of us. And so some of these questions that seem really, really mysterious to us, I think in part are explained by an understanding that God isn't in the same situation as us. He's different than us. He's higher than us. And I think someday when we get to heaven, we'll understand how all of this fits together. You know, another way that my faith interacts with my work is just in how I approach my job. I'm currently a tenure track professor at Purdue, which means I'm in the stage of my career which is publish or perish. Publish research in good journals and I'll get tenure, or if I fail to do that, I don't get tenure and I perish. I have to leave the university. And I was really excited when I got this job at Purdue. But then as soon as I showed up at Purdue and started working, the weight of the publish or perish fell on me. And I realized, whoa, I've got a lot of work to do. But thankfully, when this was going on, I was reading through the Bible and I came to John chapter 12. And there's a passage there where it was talking about how Jesus was performing all these miracles, and many of the believers, or many of the leaders, were believing in him. But they weren't openly believing in him and openly confessing him because they were afraid that if they did, they would be put out of the synagogue. And it explains in John 12:43 that the reason that they did this was because they loved the approval of men more than the approval of God. And when I read that passage, it really convicted me because I was all worried at the time about getting tenure. And I realized that tenure is really nothing more than the approval of men. I'm seeking the approval of men. And I realized that needed to be secondary in my life. That I needed to seek the approval of God above seeking the approval of men. And I think that as I do this, it brings me back to what I said earlier about how math is really like archaeology. Okay? God knows all the theorems that I need to prove. And he knows what it is that I need to do to get tenure. And as I serve him, I can have the confidence to know that everything's in his hands. And it's a comforting thought, knowing that I can have the freedom to sort of explore mathematics, to try to search the mind of God in that way, and enjoy my job and go about it freely, knowing that no matter what happens, he's still the one who's in control.